Hi, and welcome back to Monica Cooks in Her Pajamas. Yes, these are my winter formals. So tonight for dinner, we're gonna be having a ribeye steak. Along with that, we're gonna have Zucchini-Scallion Fritters, and then a Gratin Dauphinois, which is a very French version of scalloped potatoes. So let's get started. So first we're gonna start with 2.5 pounds of potatoes. If you don't have one already, you might wanna invest in getting just an inexpensive kitchen scale. Like me, I'll buy like a bag of potatoes, and then you're like, well, what is 2.5 pounds? And so if you have a scale, and I'm gonna show you mine. I love my scale. It's very used and dirty right now. And this can come out. So if you have a bowl on here, you can pull this out so you can see what the weight is, which is nice. But anyway, this works for grams, pounds, kilograms. It's great. You want to use a potato that is starchy. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to peel these, and then we're going to put them in water so they don't brown. Yeah, I'll always do half just like that, and then I spin it around. Sometimes it's a little bit slippery, so you have to really kind of hold it and be careful not to cut yourself. Go ahead and just drop it in a bowl of water, cold water. Meanwhile, we're going to get our garlic ready because this recipe calls for 6 garlic cloves, and they need to be chopped, and we can even take the germ out that's in the center because that tends to be, you know, that's where it grows so when it tends to get really hot. So this recipe calls for us removing that. Just cutting off the front and the ends because now we're going to handle this slightly differently than we have before. Sometimes it peels nicely that way. Sometimes you can get a tool to help you peel it. I don't always like using these, but sometimes these can be really helpful. You just put your garlic inside and you roll it, and it comes out, and it should be pretty peeled. Not do it again. There you go. Look at that. It shot out. I'm not gonna lie. I cut myself maybe once every time I cook. My knives are really, really sharp. I just look at it as, you know, just part of the process. And you just put on a Band-Aid and you just keep on going. Okay. Okay, they're all peeled and ready to be chopped. Now you see on this one, it's a really good example. You can see the germ. And so you can remove that if you want, which this recipe tends to call for. So if you cut it open, you can see where it is, and you can just remove it with your finger. So once you've removed all of the germ, you can rough chop these by just chopping them, or you can kind of mince them. I like to mince, so I tend to just kind of cut like this, and then I'll spin it. And I'll kind of do the same thing this direction. And then that way, I can just cut it very small. Careful with your knife, don't cut yourself like I do. So we're gonna add our 2.5 cups of our heavy cream. Now, if you don't wanna use all cream, you can do a cup of cream and a 1.5 cups of milk, or you know, 1.25 cups and a 1.25 cups of each. But I want to show you the traditional way to make this gratin. So next we're going to add the garlic. We're going to add salt to taste. So basically I'm going to do a nice big pinch of salt. Sprinkle that in there. Ground pepper. Again, same. That looks good. The other thing we want to add is nutmeg. So you're better off having whole nutmeg and grinding it on the spot instead of, let's say, having it already pre-ground and buying it that way. So you're going to use like 1/4 of a full one. I already used some the other day, as you can see. And just take a microplane and just grate it right over the pot. It's going to impart a beautiful flavor. I like a little bit more than most, so I'm going to put a little extra. That feels right to me. Okay. Heat that up. Not real high, just low. Just let those flavors meld a little bit. And then after I spend a few minutes with this, I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to go ahead and slice our potatoes with my mandolin. And then we'll add the potatoes to this. That's good. So just pour out the water and dry your potatoes with paper towel. Because if you don't dry them and you try to use it, you try to cut it on your mandolin, it's very dangerous, very slippery. So, take a potato, dry it. There we go. Okay, so I've got my mandolin. I have a slicer in already. It's not serrated, it's just straight because I basically want to cut these potatoes into rounds and I want them to be the thickness of, like, let's say a quarter. So I'm just going to adjust this bottom piece, which brings this piece of metal either, you know, up or down to make it thinner or not. And then I got to test it out. Now I have a guard, but the guard is not going to work until this is much smaller. So I'm going to start freehand, which can be very dangerous. So be careful. Now that is too thin. Let's go ahead and lower this down. Okay, so now we've got a potato that looks kind of like the size of a quarter if you look at it sideways. So that should be good. So I'm just going to do that, being very careful that when I get closer to the bottom, I slow down, and now I'm going to put the guard on. The guard goes on. There you go. There's your potato. So we're going to place these potatoes that we just sliced right into the heavy cream. We're going to go right in there. So while we're slicing all of them, they're not going to turn brown because they'll be in this cold cream. Last of your potatoes. We're going to go ahead and turn this on again. Just bring it to a simmer. And we're going to start mixing these potatoes. And you want the potatoes to be, you know, not completely submerged. You don't want them to be drowning by any means in the heavy cream mixture. So the reason why I'm doing this and why I like this recipe is because normally you would slice your potatoes and you'd put it in, you know, kind of your casserole pan, and then you would cover it with cream and your cheese and just stick it in the oven. But we're actually starting this on the stovetop, so we're allowing the cream to really be infused by the garlic, the salt and the pepper, you've got your nutmeg, and then the starch of the potatoes allows it to thicken. So it makes it really yummy. So I'm gonna probably let this go for at least gotta get it boiling and start to see it thickening. Meanwhile, I can go ahead and butter my casserole dish. So I have about a half a teaspoon of butter, and I melted it, and I'm just gonna add it. I'm gonna spread it around. It's like painting, it's pretty fun. Now you don't want this to be too greasy, so if you feel like you've got a little bit too much butter in here, go ahead and get a paper towel and just take some off, because you don't need that much. So I'm just gonna wipe it down a little bit, take some out. There, it's ready. So this recipe calls for 3/4 cup of gruyere cheese. So I'm gonna get that out and start grating it. I have my handy 3/4 cup, makes it easy. We're gonna start grating on the large grater. And finally, it's starting to boil. You want to make sure you're moving your potatoes around so they don't get stuck to the bottom, and turn it down so it starts to simmer. And it's starting to thicken a little bit, but it's not quite where I want it to be. So I'm going to give it a few more minutes. It's nice because it's going to start to soften the potatoes a bit. Oh, that looks good. Okay, let's see what we got here. Oh, that looks just about perfect. 3/4 cup. If it's overflowing, it's okay because it's cheese. Look at how it's thickened more. This looks lovely. So I think I can turn this off at this point. And I'm gonna get a slotted spoon and I'm going to take the potatoes out, and I'm going to put them in my casserole dish. So, okay, so now I've got my slotted spoon, and I'm just gonna try to put them in there, cover the whole bottom flat as possible. What we're trying to do is get the potatoes out so that we can pour the cream on top afterwards. What's really, I find impressive about this is how beautiful this cream turns out to be after you've had the potatoes cooking in it and that starch. Okay, I think I got them all out now. You know, you just want to try to make sure it's flat. I'm going to pour the rest of this beautiful cream over the top. Here we go. There's a couple of rogue potatoes. Okay. Use a spatula so you don't miss out on any of the beautiful garlic that's down there, all these beautiful bits. Just spread it out over your potato. That's perfect. We're going to sprinkle our cheese on top. So, got our 3/4 cup of cheese. So just sprinkle your cheese on the top. I like a lot of cheese. Clay and I both do. And I was just going to say that if you don't have Gruyere cheese, you can always substitute another white cheese like Monterey Jack, though it's not going to be quite the same, but in a pinch it'll do. Okay, so now we're going to stick that in the oven at 425 degrees, which has already been preheated, for about 30 minutes. Then after 30 minutes, we're going to lower the heat to 350 for about another 10 to 15 minutes. We want to check it because we really want that cheese to be beautifully browned on top, golden. We don't want it to burn. If it starts to get too much color, of course, I'll cover it with a little bit of tin foil. And then you know it's done when you can put a fork through it and it just glides easily through all the layers of the potato. So we'll be back. All right, we're gonna make our next thing, okay? You ready? You ready? Okay. All right, so we're back. Finally poured myself some of that wine I was talking about the other day. Okay. So next we're going to make our Zucchini-Scallion Fritters. And what we're doing is we're doing 2 pounds of zucchini for this recipe. We need to grate the zucchini. So first we're going to start with this part. Cut off the ends. And if you don't want to work with such a big piece, you know, like this, you can just cut it in half and do that. I'm just going to grate it. She's going to come over so she's going to see stuff flying on the ground and think it's for her even when it isn't. Be very careful with your fingers. Slow down towards the end so you can try to get as much of this. Sometimes I flatten my hand out and just kind of bring it down to try to get as much as possible. There you go. Put that in the colander. Okay, so let's get the rest of the zucchini. Okay, now that everything's in there, we're going to get a teaspoon of salt and we're going to sprinkle that over our zucchini. I'm going to let that drain for about 10 minutes. Now I'm going to start on the scallion portion. I've got 2 scallions here. They've already been washed. I'm going to chop off, and actually I might plant that later. You plant this down in your garden. It'll start to grow this green part again and you can use that. So I like to keep those. Careful not to cut your fingers. I mean, I've got some time before it gets down to the end, but you still want to make sure your fingers are really out of the way and that you're just moving the food and keeping your knife pretty much in the same spot. Sometimes it's like, does it actually move? But you are actually pushing it. Sometimes you got to get some of it out of your way, so I'm going to go ahead and put it in a bowl. So our 10 minutes are up, and I was just tossing it around to kind of see how it's doing. It's getting nice and wilty. And I'm gonna have to push as much water as I can out of this by pressing down. But I'm, again, kind of short, so I'm gonna move the other table. Okay, so our timer's gone off. It's been 30 minutes. Oh, look at how beautiful it looks. Looking good. I'm gonna go ahead and turn down the heat to 350. I'm just gonna give it 10 minutes first because it was looking pretty brown, and I'm gonna check it again and just kind of see where we're at that point. I'm even gonna test it too. Because you never know, everybody's, the height of the potatoes is different, the size can be different, so things can cook faster than you think they can. So our zucchini should be ready to start. Oh, look at that, see the water? So you want to squeeze this with your hands, or you can use like a cheesecloth or towel. I was taught to do it with my hands. That's what my grandmother always did. So I do that until I get most of the moisture out, and then put it in my bowl. Just kind of alternate hands like you're milking a cow. It's kind of good to have it run through your fingers. You can feel it, So I put a plate underneath my colander because otherwise the juice will be going everywhere. And you don't have to rinse this because the salt you've added is the salt that's going to be in the dish now. Okay, so now I have my zucchini shredded with the water squeezed out, and I'm going to grab a bowl because I need a bowl big enough to beat this egg, and then I'm going to add the zucchini and the scallions and some flour. One egg. Beat that. You don't want to overwork it. You don't want your egg to get rubbery. Just incorporated. That's lovely. Frothy. Zucchini to the egg or scallion. A 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. And this recipe calls for 1/2 cup of flour. And it's really specific about how it wants you to measure it. Some people swear by just dipping it in and leveling it. This one wants you to spoon it in. So it's another way, if you're not gonna weigh it, it's another way of doing it where you're not, if you scoop it, sometimes if you scoop it, it can compound and put too much in your measuring cup. So I'm using this little scoop instead of a spoon. You just kind of drop it in, spoon it in lightly like that. There you go. Now it's nice and tall, and I can level it. Like that. I'm going to add that. And now I'm just going to mix that together. Make sure it's well incorporated. You just want to make sure it's thoroughly combined. Yeah, you're not worried about if you're smashing it a little bit, meaning using too much force to combine it. It's not a problem because basically you're making a batter that you're going to spoon into some really hot oil and basically fry these up. Oh, these look good. I'm going to get a fork and see how soft they are. Pretty soft, going right through. Look at that. And that's because it's a very wide casserole dish, and it's not piled high. If you had used a smaller dish, I would have had to go, much higher with the potato, and then that would have been taken longer to cook. So it's pretty good. I'm gonna say it's done. So now's the point where I want to get my spatula out. I want to scrape down the sides and the bottom just to make sure that all the flour has been incorporated properly, because you really don't want that, flour in the raw, if it's not incorporated right, doesn't have the best taste. That's why if you make a roux or something like this, you always want to make sure you're mixing it in well. Looks great. Got my plate, my paper towels. So get down my scan pan. on my heat and add my half a cup of vegetable oil. So not a lot. So I'm going to start over like a medium to high just to get it hot, and then I'm going to turn it down. I need to use a slotted wooden spoon. Oh, actually, maybe, yes, to flip them. Okay. So with oil, you want to look at it. You can kind of see when it starts to get hot, it starts to kind of almost shimmer. The other thing to do is to take just a tiny bit of your batter, just a tiny bit, just drop it in, and it's just starting to sizzle. So I'm gonna go ahead and, I kind of do this just by feeling. I'm gonna scoop out like a little mound and I'm gonna flatten it. It doesn't have to be round, it can be, but I think the beauty of a fritter is it can be anything you want it to be. So I'm just gonna scoop out a couple of those, flatten them down. And let them cook. You want to cook them for about 2 minutes on each side, maybe a little more, looking at like 4 to 6 minutes until brown on both sides. It's about 2 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. Ah, look at that. Looks pretty good. It feels nice and solid. It's not all, it's not tough, but it's not mushy. So imagine it's well cooked inside. I'm gonna take these off the heat. So while those are frying, I'm gonna get our ribeye steak ready. Taking it out of the fridge a little bit earlier because, as I mentioned before, you want your protein to get to room temperature. So no need to wash it. It's just water. It's not really blood, even though it looks red. So just dry it off with paper towels as dry as possible, because when it goes into the pan later on, you want it to be nice and dry. I'm going to season that just simply with salt and pepper. Get our kosher salt and pepper. I'm just going to sprinkle it all over the salt. Pepper. You always want to use fresh ground pepper if you can. And then I'm going to turn this over with my other hand, so I'm not reaching in my salt with the hand that I just touched the beef with. And do the same thing. Okay. Just going to let this sit for a few minutes. Never be afraid to test your food out. And you want to sprinkle these with a tiny bit of salt while they're hot. Notice I'm using a slotted spoon so that any of the oil can go straight through it back into the pan. Let's just sprinkle with a little kosher salt. A little sprinkle. This is a cast iron pan by Field Company. I also have Lodge, or Lodge, however you like to pronounce it, which is very inexpensive and phenomenal, but very heavy. And after I had cancer, I found it was really hard for me, because I had breast cancer, and my shoulders and the whole upper body, trying to lift heavy, really heavy pans was hard. So I discovered Field Company. They're a great company, not cheap though. So we're gonna go ahead and put this on high, and we're gonna add, and we're gonna let that get a little hot, and we're gonna add a high smoking point oil, like a grapeseed is perfect for what we want to do today. So I've got my grapeseed. I'm just going to put a little bit of a drizzle of that in the pan when it's hot. Let it get really hot. Almost smoking, not quite. We'll see it shimmer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and drizzle in some of my oil. So I just added the oil, and you notice it's starting to break apart. It's getting really hot, and I want to wait for it to shimmer. So you have to be really careful with cast iron. It gets very hot. I have a little mitt that I'm using to move the pan around. And I'm going to need that because I'm going to cook, you know, depending on how thick your meat is. This is not that thick. And Clay and I like our beef medium rare to rare. So I'll probably only cook this for like 2 minutes per side. And then I'm gonna finish it with butter. You can see how hot this is getting. It's starting to, everything's getting pushed apart, which is great because it's gonna make a nice, beautiful sear. See that? That's brilliant. Get my butter ready. I'm gonna wanna use like 2 tablespoons of butter to finish it, maybe a little more. This is a salted butter. Generally, when you're using butter, if you're baking or even cooking, you want to use unsalted. But because we're using it as a finish, I'm going to go ahead and use my salted butter because it's so tasty. You can see that it's starting to cook where it's cooking at the bottom and how far up. That's what we want. Oh, look at that. Lovely. And maybe because we do like it kind of rare, I might put in my butter at 1.5 minutes, and then I'm going to start spooning it over with a big spoon. When I get down to about 30 seconds left, I'm going to want to put the butter in the pan, let it start melting. There it goes. Look at that. And what you're going to do is you're going to let that melt. You're going to tilt your pan, tip it towards you. You're just going to take that butter and you're just going to cook that steak on that outside. Look at that. Beautiful scalding, making a beautiful finish. That's about it. Done. Now, we're not going to serve it with all that butter. We're going to pull it out of there. And we're going to let this sit for about 5 minutes. So I've got something, this I actually got in Argentina. It's what they put their beef on because they're big beef eaters. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out. Set it on my cutting board and I'm going to let that rest for about 5 minutes. Okay, let's see. It's now rested about 5 minutes. And you want to let it rest because you want all the juices to kind of, oh, look at that. It's totally exactly like Clay and I like it, medium rare, but closer to rare. So I'm just going to go ahead and slice this up. And as you can see, one steak is like plenty for 2 people. I can't understand. I can barely eat 4 ounces of this. Clay's gonna eat most of it. Yeah, this is like the best part here. So I'm gonna cut this like this so you get the picture. Okay, a couple of these. Dauphinois. So everything's plated. I didn't want to forget the sour cream for the zucchini fritters because that's a lovely accompaniment. So just have some of that on your plate. And then we've got our beautiful buttered steak and our Gratin Dauphinois. And come on, let's eat. That's good.